Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be discussing a quartet by the name of Big Country, who do not play country music. Or do they? Just depends on which country you're talking about. They actually consisted of four members: former Skids guitarist Stuart Adamson, guitarist Bruce Watson, and rhythm section Tony Butler on bass and Mark Brzezicki on drums. Both of them had formerly worked together with Pete Townsend, Simon Townsend, and some other acts. But they formed Big Country together, and in 1983, they released their first album, The Crossing. I know I recently did a video spotlighting my albums on the wall, but now I'm going to talk about their whole catalog. I usually like to start these videos out and tell you how I got into the band, and it was basically because I had read something in one of the British magazines about them, and I walked into Music Market in Costa Mesa, and there on the end cap of the import section was the debut album by Big Country called The Crossing. Now, the version I bought on LP was this blue color here with silver writing on it. At this point, as I said, it was an import. It had not been released in the U.S. I had not heard one track by them, but the album was produced by Steve Lillywhite, so that told me that it's got to be good because I love Steve Lillywhite's production on things like XTC. So I bought it, took it home, and it was fantastic. A very unique sound. These big, bold drums, great bass lines, dual guitars that would sometimes sound like Scottish bagpipes. But it was interestingly produced. It was like the album was condensed, so Big Country presented themselves as one piece. You know, it wasn't the bass that stood out, or the guitars that stood out, or Stewart's vocals, or the drumming. It was everything that stood out, and it was truly magnificent. It was this ginormous, wonderful sound. Of course, everybody knows the album by the single In a Big Country, but it's also got Fields of Fire, Harvest Home, Inwards, and of course my favorite song by Big Country is Chance, and that's on this album. This is the deluxe edition with loads of bonus material. You need it in your collection. In 1984, they put out a non-album single EP called Wonderland, and the title track is truly amazing. Later that year, 1984, they released their second album, Steel Town. This continued that same sound. It was also produced by Steve Lillywhite, and features songs like East of Eden, Just a Shadow, Where the Rose is Sown, and of course it has Wonderland added as bonus tracks. And in 1985, they did the score to a Scottish independent film called Restless Natives. That was released on vinyl, later released on CD, and that's it. Restless Natives. This also features a second disc called Rarities, which is non-album tracks. 1986 saw an album called The Seer, and this was produced by Robin Millar. Slightly different sound, still sounded very much like Big Country, but it didn't have this big, cavernous, overwhelming sound as the first two albums, which is a nice departure that they were moving in a different direction. This contains great hits like Look Away, One Great Thing. There's a great song called Hold the Heart. The title track actually features vocals by Kate Bush. This is the expanded edition, and it features all those bonus tracks. As you can tell there on CD2, it features the Restless Native soundtrack, but it's broken up only into two tracks, whereas this one here is actually broken up into various songs. 2 years later, 1988, brought the album Peace in Our Time. This was a radical departure in many ways. They moved away from the sort of post-punk Scottish folk of old, and they embraced a more American rock sound. Now, it still sounds very much like Big Country. I mean, Stuart Adamson has a very unique voice. Tony Butler's harmony vocals are very unique to Big Country, and of course the musicianship, but it's definitely embracing more of a commercial rock sound, which I don't find negative at all. Bands need to grow and expand their audiences. This has King of Emotion, Broken Heart, 13 Valleys, which is another favorite, 1,000-Yard Stare, Peace in Our Time. This, of course, is the expanded edition with bonus material, demos, and non-album tracks. Took another 3 years, and out comes Peace in Our Time. Moves sort of in the same direction, more of a rock direction. Still very Big Country. Now, Mark Brzezicki quit during this album, so pretty much most of the album was recorded as a trio, and this is the expanded edition. This actually has We're Not in Kansas and Ships, which are great. Beautiful People, You, Me, and the Truth, and lots of bonus material. The Buffalo Skinners followed in 1993. This is the version that has a few bonus tracks. Now, they re-recorded We're Not in Kansas and Ships on this album, but there are also great songs like Alone, What Are You Working For, Long Way Home. But it kind of looks like they're sitting there going, yeah, we're big country, but we kind of miss Mark. Well, lucky for them, all was right in the world, because by 1995, Mark Brzezicki was back in the band for the album Why the Long Face. This actually features You Dreamer, Message of Love, Sail Into Nothing, God's Great Mistake, Send You. This was still more in that heavy rock direction, but still very big country. When I say heavy rock, I don't mean like hard rock or AOR or classic rock. I just mean it's heavier than they used to be, but still a fine collection of songs. That is Why the Long Face. Just last year, Cherry Red Records released a 4-CD version of Why the Long Face with the alternate cover, or maybe this is the alternate cover. But anyway, this is the same album, but what it does is it has 3 extra discs, one of B-sides and single mixes and stuff, one of acoustic live called Eclectic, and one of demos. So that's a nice little collection if you are a big country fan. 1999 gave us Driving to Damascus, which in my opinion is the best of the later albums. Bunch of fantastic songs, including the title track, Driving to Damascus. See You, Fragile Thing, Bella, Dive Into Me. Lots of great material on this album. This seems to have a couple little bonus tracks down there at the bottom. Now, this album was also released under the title John Wayne's Dream, with an alternate cover, but pretty much the same tracks. So Driving to Damascus and John Wayne's Dream. Same album, different album titles. And that was it for them for studio releases. They split up after that. Stuart Adamson went on to form an acoustic folk duo in America called the Raphaels, and they released one album called Supernatural. And unfortunately, he took his own life in December of 2001. Some years later, Tony, Mark, and Bruce decided to get back together, and they did a short tour as a trio. And eventually they brought in a few members, including Bruce's son and Mike Peters from The Alarm, and they released an album called The Journey. It sort of ends up sounding closer to an Alarm Mike Peters album. They should have called the band Big Alarm or Big Peters. Anyway, there's plenty of big country compilations out there, best ofs. I don't have any of the compilations because everything that's on them is on these expanded editions that I already own. But I do have 2 real quick I want to show you. Rarities 2, and this was actually the sequel to the bonus disc that came with Restless Natives, which was just called Rarities. And then finally, I have a compilation that I don't see too often, and it's called Undercover, and it's just a collection of their released cover versions. But anyway, that's it with this episode. I appreciate you hanging out while I babble about music. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and until the next time, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie.